when I first started seeing you play in New York in the early 2000s, a couple of things stuck out to me. Number one was that you're obviously doing the math stuff with Jean-Michel and some other people. You're really into the math stuff, I could tell. And the other was that your playing actually had a simplicity to it.
That you describe it as the math stuff. I'm wondering, do you mean like rhythms, like rhythmic language?
Yes. So for instance, like you're playing, shoot, I forget the song. I had a bootleg of it that for years that I lost, but it was you and Jean-Michel, and probably Francois, from Cornelia Street Cafe. You guys were playing some straight ahead swing classic from the sort of Cooking with Miles Davis canon. And then you and Jean-Michel started introducing some like 5-note groups, probably like 5/8 over the top of your 4. And then the band collectively modulated to the 5/8. And that became the new tempo, and you were sort of swinging, and I think so. But then you were maintaining the original form.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, was really, really fresh and new at the time, and it was blowing everybody's minds. But the other thing I found unique about your playing was that relative to what jazz drumming had kind of become in the 80s and 90s, your playing had kind of a almost throwback type of simplicity to it, where on top of all the complex stuff you were doing, you weren't ornamenting things a ton. You were just sort of playing very simply and very clearly. I know you went to North Texas, right?
Yes.
So I'm curious, what were you listening to, and who were you checking out that helped you kind of come up with that style and that voice?
So you mean kind of like kind of stating simple melodic ideas, or maybe even the melody of the song? That's kind of what you mean, just to clarify.
Yeah. And however, so I'm describing how I saw your style as different from everyone, but equally valid is any sort of self-interpretation of why you think you were zagging when other drummers were zigging, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess that's, yeah. I mean, there was a certain thing that, I mean, to be honest, I think I wanted to do something a little different if I could, because I don't know. I guess I felt like yeah, I mean, I was a fan of things that were pretty standard, I guess. Like I loved Dave Weckl, when I was 16, and I still do, in my way. I think I did make a purpose though of trying to explore like little like new angles on things that I felt like hadn't been explored, and then try to make them musical. I guess another thing is, what you mentioned about like the rhythm versus like very simple melody. I mean, I really liked contrast in music, not just dynamic contrast, which I felt was used, but also other ways of contrasting things. And I guess density versus, a lot of space was another way to contrast. And so I even kind of made a list of like ways that you could contrast music. Some of them are pretty far out even, but with some of the things in there that we would think of first, but some of the things that you wouldn't, and so I think the contrasting element really got me, like playing with people like you described, Jean-Michel and Francois, who just play a ton of shit, and often, it forced me to figure out ways that I could, because I couldn't like, a lot of times the drum solo is, so a lot of times it's kind of like the, what word am I looking for? Not the epitome, but like, like the finale,
the pinnacle. Yeah.
Yeah, of the thing. And it's like with them, I kind of gave up on making it that, because I just couldn't out pinnacle them, like, And so I needed to figure out a way to contrast them to really create interest in the listener, right? To be able to draw people in. Um, so then, to kind of get into your specific question, what was I listening to and who influenced me? There was, I would say a couple people really in particular that really did influence me into not necessarily that they were always playing like that, but in the way that they contrasted things and played extremely melodically. Uh, and um, and one of them was Earl Harvin, who was a drummer that I was listening to pretty much whenever I had a chance in the years that I was at North Texas. And I could go on about a lot of things about his playing, but one of the things that I really got from him is just not afraid to play the melody of the tune, um, and make it sound hip. Like it sounded good, it sounded musical, and almost in a profound way, like just because you just didn't hear people do that, I guess. And so, and the other person is Jim White, who is very also unique and also very kind of melodic in a very different way. But and those were, they were pretty young at the time. I mean, like no more than I would say like 5 years, 6 years older than me, something like that. So, um, they were, kind of at their, what can I say? Just really strong players and profound and really kind of just swept me up with what they were doing and also kind of encouraged me to develop even the ideas that I would get from listening to them and then develop them in my own way, which is kind of what I did with being able to play like actual notes and pitches with tunes. So I kind of took that and I mean, a lot of the things that I was getting about phrasing from people like Ralph Peterson and Ed Soph, and then tried to kind of combine that with the contours of the melodies and also the pitches of the melodies. So those are all like a lot of little things that were just kind of like jumbling around, for me learning. But I think that the contrast thing it's just important because I wanted to play, I wanted to be able to be versatile and play everything and stuff like that. But I also realized that, there was a point where it just didn't make musical sense to play fast and loud when like directly after another solo that was that.
Did you ever feel any pressure to conform more? Or were you always perfectly comfortable just kind of hollowing out your own thing and investigating your own idiom? And the reason I ask is because I've, to some degree, been on this drum journey. And for me and for a lot of my students, we talk about this constantly. It's very hard to block out the noise and just trust that something you're nurturing is artistically valid and is going to grow into something you enjoy playing. And sometimes there's genuinely a question of, oh, there's this other player, this other style that maybe I should take a detour and investigate, but you can only kind of do one or the other. Yeah, I'm curious how you reconciled that back when you were in college and how you approach it now.
Yeah, I mean, I would, the way that I guess I'd see myself is not exactly is a little more of maybe a conformist than you see me. So for example, I studied, I'm not self-taught. I not only am I, have I had teachers, but I've also had people that have pointed me, in directions of like, hey, let's check this out, listen to this. And I went there. Most of the things that I play, I've heard, I've gotten from somewhere. It's true that there's some things like I would almost say like, maybe 20% of, kind of who I am is maybe through taking an idea that I got from somewhere and developing it in my own way. But I wouldn't even say it's that much. I mean, but I did make a conscious choice at some point for most of my practicing to be what I call creative practicing, which is basically something where, I develop an idea that I have. Even if it's an idea that I get from somebody else, it's an idea that I think can be developed in my own way. And so then I develop it and maybe continue to keep developing it if possible. And eventually it does kind of become my idea. And yeah, I did make a conscious choice to really practice that way at some point. I think it was probably, I must have been probably like already like 22 or, something like that, or, 21, 22, after definitely you really, practicing different styles and, following what my teachers told me to do. And, like being able to play, like I didn't feel comfortable before, like if I was put in a gig situation, I didn't know a tune or I didn't know a style, how to play, like I didn't want any of that to happen, right? But at some point I realized that I really had to be myself 100%, and that would be the strongest statement that I could make, rather than me playing, Venezuelan merengue, which is as hip as it is, and I can get really into it, is never going to be 100% my world, so like all those things could come in and influence my playing, but it's not going to be, if I tried to be that, it would never be as good as something that I was trying to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's really where that came from, but I don't really see myself as rebelling against, look, I would make my own decisions. So, for example, if somebody said you should do this because of this, and then I thought about it and I disagreed, and I would do something else. I wouldn't necessarily. I would think for myself, but I wouldn't, disregard something because the masses were doing it. I just would have to really have a think about it if I thought that was valid,
Yeah.
or important. And sometimes I didn't. And I tell my students all the time, like I say, look, you're never ever going to have a teacher. You should never have a teacher where you agree with everything they say, including me. You need to think about everything for yourself, and you need to take the good things that apply to you and disregard the things that you don't agree with. And that's perfectly fine. You should have many things that you disagree with come from me or that don't relate to you. We could say, that you can disregard and not follow. And that's fine with me. And you should always think for yourself,
Do you ever have conversations with your students where they're feeling bad about their playing or distrusting their own instincts about where to go artistically, and feeling like they're checking out all the cats on Instagram and feeling a little bit overwhelmed? I'm asking this because this is literally a perennial conversation I have practically every week with my students. And it's something I still go through occasionally. But yeah, do you have those conversations? And if so, like, what do you say to people?
Just so I understand, basically the conversation that they're overwhelmed with the amount of things that are out there that they want to basically be able to do.
And maybe also with an added angle that their exposure to some great players is causing them to feel worse about their own playing or distrust the direction they're going. Yeah.
The first that one is tricky. Well, the more obvious one, I guess, would be just to say that I call it horse blinders. You put on blinders, and what I used, and this happens. Look, this isn't a new thing. Just because we have access to YouTube and the internet doesn't mean that I didn't feel overwhelmed in college with the amount of things to practice. I mean, this is not something that is unheard of. I mean, I understand that there's more to access, of course. Of course there's more, but still there was way too much to access then too. Maybe in 100 years ago when there wasn't really access to records and you just have to go out and see what you could see live, then we can talk about real horse blinders, right? But I went to a listening library and I took out CDs to borrow and to listen to. I mean, we didn't have obviously anything on any internet music, but still there was a vast amount of music even in the listening libraries, right? So I guess my point is just that what I tell them is make a list of the things, like really write it down of the things that, that you feel like you can't do and you want to do, right? Or could be something like, I want to play like so and so, or I want to play something like so and so. I've been infected and like I've seen this person play and they have really fast, double strokes, and I want to have those. Okay, cool. Write it down. Boom. And then so write all this stuff down, first of all. And that's going to do one major thing that's really important already. Just by writing down, it's going to clear your head of having to remember all the things, right? And so then once you write down everything, and then you can keep adding, to this list, and then pick a couple things just at once and work on those and forget the other stuff. It's there. You wrote it down. It's not going anywhere, right? Make a copy. Put it on a hard drive if you're worried that it's going to go somewhere. But you don't have to keep thinking about it, and that's the main thing. Because if you're thinking about, how do I comp like Philly Joe Jones, and you're really thinking like, how do I play single strokes like, I don't know, Brojo Donati or something like that, right? Like you're not going to be able to focus on the thing that you're trying to focus on, and so that's not going to help your practicing, right? So the point is that you have to kind of compartmentalize, at least temporarily, and then that can change. So I think that's the way that I can really be of help. That's what I tell students. I'm really careful as a teacher not to give too many different things to like as homework. It's really important that you have an idea of how the brain works as a teacher, and how the best learning occurs. And also, all students are different, but a lot of students are very similar too, and it does relate to how much time one has to practice, of course. But still, if you overwhelm a student, it's not a good, it doesn't have a good result, it's not gonna help them, and it's not gonna help anybody. So it's much better it's like going to the gym or something like that. You really want to start slow and then, build up confidence, build up, somebody's, just like how you feel that you're doing, right? Keep a record of how they're doing. If they want to practice something, try to, create a way for them to remember where they were 2 weeks ago. And it's because it's easy to kind of forget that. So anyway, that's a fairly easy one. A little more difficult is if you see somebody and you're just like, I want to quit, right? Well, I mean, that's a little more of like a psychological issue, I think, because, well, why do you want to quit after you see someone? Is it because that you feel like you'll never be able to do that? Like, I would say that's probably the most common reason, right? Is because it's like you might see somebody who's like, you want to be able to do that, but you feel like you'll never be able to achieve that. Like, but I mean, that's not necessarily the only reason for that feeling, but because the thing is, I think the main thing that you want to be able to ask yourself is, first of all, do I really, really, really want to do that? And then if so, why? And then if you understand why, right, then already you should be able to understand the components to what the person's doing and how they're, because like a lot of it is figuring out how did they get there to be able to do what they're doing. And then once you ask those questions, you're already going to have an idea of that. And then you're going to kind of have an idea of how to proceed. So I think that, maybe it's similar. I guess it's kind of, that's why you said it's kind of related. Like if you see somebody and you just feel, oh, they're too good. Like, I don't want to, I can't even begin to touch this. And maybe it's just this feeling of being overwhelmed. But it's really like this one step at a time, one thing at a time, and understanding where you're going. Because I think if you see somebody and you're like, I can't do that, I don't think you have an understanding yet. Just a general understanding of what even they're doing at all. I mean, Keith Carlock, this drummer Keith Carlock. I used to watch him in college, and he played so fast, and I had no idea what he was playing, and I thought it was great. I thought it was so cool, but I was just like, I had to ask this friend of mine. I was like, can you tell me what the hell is he playing? It's too fast for me to figure it out. I was kind of I didn't feel like I wanted to quit or anything like that. It was just that I just didn't I just couldn't follow it. Like it was just too fast. And then the friend of mine was with me actually told me, and he actually knew he could. And I was like, oh, okay, you know. And then it's like I have like a kind of somewhere to kind of go from, you know, to kind of start. And I remember that feeling with him. And I mean, I use him as an example because I actually liked what he was playing too. And there was like kind of a lot of other people that I would say I couldn't understand what they were doing, and I didn't really want to, or I didn't really care to understand maybe all the
Yeah.
time, or I didn't necessarily like the final result of what what was happening. So it wasn't that important to me. Um, anyway, long answer to your question. Sorry.
That's a great answer. I hope everybody listening winds it back to the bit about the list, because that's maybe the best answer to that I've ever heard. Right? Like, do something to get it out of your head, and then through the act of writing it down somewhere, you're both relieving yourself of having to carry it around with you, and also maybe showing yourself that this is too large a list of things to do everything, just by witnessing the sheer size of it. And then pick one or two things and prioritize, because in order to get good at any one thing, you have to go deep enough with it. You can't just be jumping from shiny object to shiny object.
And then just know that you can change that list too. You can, you can prioritize something, two things, three things, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then you can change it. You can prioritize other things. You will do that. That's the point.
There's also a kernel in that I wanted to pull on, or a thread to mix metaphors, which is writing down goals and then structuring practice toward those goals, which seems obvious, but I feel like that's only one of two ways to approach practice. And goal-directed practice versus kind of arbitrary practice is a debate that I end up having more than you would think, where if we see goal-directed practice as everything you're working on in the shed should be serving a goal, or should either be serving a goal, or you're just practicing developing your voice for the sake of developing your voice, versus the type of practice where it's like, I should work on XYZ abstract concept, which is an end in itself and is just kind of a practice concept, like independence or four-way coordination or stick control. And I'm not quite, so maybe I'm closed-minded on this, but the way I've tended to fall when people tell me I want to practice my independence, my response is almost always, so that you can do what? Like, what are you trying to achieve by practicing independence? And at least lately, I've been pretty militant that most everything people work on in the shed should serve a goal. But I was actually catching up with John Riley like a month or two ago, and he sort of softly opened my mind to the idea that, yeah, there are some things that you just practice to kind of introduce a little randomness and to maybe prime your brain to go in a direction you wouldn't have thought of. So I'm curious how you tend to approach that dichotomy, like both with your own practice and with your teaching.
Yeah, well, it's interesting things to think about for sure. I mean, I think, even with creative, I like the idea of, when you practice, you should have a goal in mind about kind of where you're going, what you're trying to get to, but also to say that the goal is malleable. It changes as you practice. So like, for example, if you start practicing something, an idea, say it's a sticking pattern, right? And then you realize it can go somewhere else, your goal will move. I can do this with it. And that's a way that you can do that in a creative way, but still be goal oriented, right? If you see someone play, like, I remember seeing, very young, seeing Joe Farnsworth play, and just thinking to myself, like, I want to be able to play like really fast between all the different drums, well, okay, I mean, we laugh because it's a funny, because we know that that's true. Like, that's how if we don't understand something, like, because it's so fast, I didn't really understand what the hell he was doing, but I just wanted to be able to play really fast between all the drums, And so if I went into the shed in that with that goal in mind. It's a goal, but it's not a clear goal, right? It's so then once I kind of sat down and I didn't actually try to really figure out what Joe Farnsworth was doing. What I did do though was I was like, okay, well, let me see if I played, what if I play four notes on each drum and I just go counterclockwise around the set? Well, how would I? Well, I have to figure out what sticking to use to be able to do that. And I figured it out, and then I was able to do it. And then, oh, well, what if I wanted to play four notes on each drum and go counterclockwise around the set? Oh, well, that's another sticking, and I got to figure that out. And once I did, I realized that I could do that pretty fast too. And then I realized, like, yeah, everybody's just kind of playing their own thing, but they're playing like it really fast because they've developed it. And so it's hard for me to understand because it's so fast, like to hear it, right? Um, but once I started to actually sit down and think, oh, what do I want to play? What is the goal here? And then apply just the knowledge that I have, which is, well, if that's my goal, how do I do it? How do I make a sticking to do what I want, to get to the goal that I want to do? And then you develop it. So I like the idea that things should be goal oriented. I don't think that it takes away from creative practicing at all. It just encourages you to be creative and try to understand where you're going with something, but like you don't want that time in the shed to be kind of thoughtless. I think that's really what you're meaning. Like you want to have thought and direction to your practicing, even when you're being creative, because that's the thing that really does help you get better. And it makes a big difference in how much time you put into the craft and then what you get out of it. Because we've all seen people that put a lot of time in and don't get a lot out of it. Why? Well, they don't know how to practice, right? Haven't figured out how to practice it practically and effectively. And I think that is exactly what you're talking about, which is this orientation of direction or goal. Yeah, that's the culprit there. Yeah.
That's a great jumping off point for another thing that I think you were a big influence on me with regard to, which is constructing training scenarios for improvisation. Like in the mid 20 teens, I started playing around with sort of creating training wheels or guardrails, to practice improvising, but in a way that I wouldn't have to contend with every bit of drum vocabulary ever invented. So just for instance, I'm going to play swing at this tempo. I'm going to use fuller tom and snare drum and kick drum, no rim shots, and I'm going to do quarters and eighths. And I'm pretty sure that I got at least some of that from you. But if I'm correctly identifying the approach here, how did you come up with that to the degree you can say? And if you're able to put your finger on it, what are some things you've discovered recently in that regard?
Can you say it again exactly what the specific idea is?
Say I want to learn to improvise a jazz drum solo, and I've been listening to a lot of Max Roach and Philly Joe. So I can practice the vocabulary, I can transcribe the solos, I can get the stickings, I can practice the sort of basic rudiments. That's one side of the ledger. And then I go into Smalls, or at the time, Cleopatra's Needle, and then I just try to hope that something I practiced verbatim comes out in my playing. And it seems like there's a missing step there. And I remember you were among some of the people I was listening to who were talking about ways to fill in that missing step. Maybe a good place to start is just to ask, like, what would you tell a drummer who asked you that question? Like, how do I get stuff that I'm shedding when it's like a verbatim transcription or something to actually come out in my playing when I'm improvising without my needing to consciously remember it?
I mean, there's definitely value to that. And it's language, and you're learning language that, that has been played and developed by master players, and it's part of the tradition of this music, and the instrument as well. So I do support transcribing. I do support studying master players. However, when you said that you feel like it's missing a step, I do think it's missing the most important step, really. And because the thing is, like, what are you trying to? Well, for me, what I'm trying to do, if I'm taking a solo, right, the most important thing for me is the song. And so, that I play something respectful or derivative of someone else is something out. That's something different. That's language on top of that. But the song itself, I feel like if the song has the priority in the mind of the musician, then that's the way for the voice of the particular musician to come out. So like if I go into a situation and I'm really just thinking in the song, then that's the way that who I am is going to come out if I really know the song. See what I mean? So the song is always first for me. And so like if I'm listening to a band and there's a time for a drum solo, and the drummer just plays the melody of the song, like I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty content. I feel pretty full. you know but like, and that's okay. Like that's enough. It's not even showing me that they know the song. It's just the song. Like I'm already hearing the song, and it's related. There's a relation. There's an obvious relation, and I want to hear a relation to the song. I always want to hear a relation to the song. I don't want to just hear like a lick for the sake of a lick. It doesn't have solid ground for me. It's empty. It doesn't have meaning. So if it's a lick for the sake of the song, it works, but it just always has to be in service to the song. So I think that's the difference. That I'm, and when I transcribe, when I teach, about transcriptions and stuff like that, I'm always telling people to develop or to learn small ideas, words, rather than sentences or, whole paragraphs, because the words are easier to kind of interchange when you know a song, right? When you know the song, you can use that vocabulary in the song. See what I mean? Same thing with rhythm, and that's the way that I've really developed rhythm. And for me, it's just like a rhythmic language that I was fascinated with, and I wanted to learn more and be able to talk in kind of, let's say, more sophisticated language. And the way that I learned it was always through a song. The song would be primary, and it would always be like kind of like the floor, so the floor. If you're worried about the floor giving way, you're in trouble, right? You need to be confident that the floor you're walking on is not going to cave in. And then whatever you do on top of that is kind of, extra, icing, or whatever. So that's the same way that I develop rhythm in that way, is always with a song first, hearing a song, form, but more than the form, the song itself, the harmony and the melody, and the form. And then the language kind of goes on top of that. So I would say that for me, that is really the primary thing, that also not just for what I'm listening to, but also people that I'm playing with. They just really need to relate to the song, because that's what I'm relating to, and that's the way that we're going to be able to communicate.
And you did that in a very literal way by teaching yourself to bend the pitches of the drums to make melodies. So you could play a lot of melodies on the drums. And in fact, when I've seen you with some of your own groups, particularly maybe back in the 55 bar days, like I would see you quite often just play the melody of a song on the drums, maybe with the timpani mallet, by using your elbow to change the pitch of the drum. That must have taken some work to be able to like nail the pitch right off the bat, right? That's a very specific skill.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, but it's not. I mean, I think honestly, it's more of it from my perspective. It's more of an illusion than it is a reality. Like in other words, I'm not really nailing the pitches a lot of the time, but
you're getting it close enough though that the listener knows what you're doing.
it's close enough, but it's the phrasing that's drawing the listener in to kind of think it's the right, it's like an illusion. Like sometimes you look at something and it's not what you think, right? I mean, it's like it's kind of like that. You're with the phrasing, your brain is already drawn to the song if you know it, if you know the song, and then. Like, for example, if you know a tune, like, let's say you know Anthropology, you know that tune, but if I was just going to play this, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? If you know the song, you're already drawn into Anthropology world, right? I'm not even playing any pitches right now. I'm doing some contour as far as dynamics and some accents and things like that, but there's no pitch difference, right? So, but if you know the tune, that phrasing is already grabbing you. Right. And so that's why I'm saying it's partially an illusion, but yes, I do try to get the actual pitches as well, but I just wanted to clear it up that like, it's not as perfect as I think that, some people think that the pitches aren't necessarily like, auto-tuned or anything like that,
Yeah, no, but I've seen you hit it impressively close in a few live situations.
I do try. I definitely have moments of trying to do that. Yeah.
But I think that's illustrative of that kind of philosophy where obviously you're practicing the licks and the rudiments and the patterns, but you're also introducing this sort of radical departure from the need to play any sort of drumistic lick at all by just putting the melody front and center. So if any of the viewers or listeners aren't completely familiar with your canon, I just wanted to toss that out there to say like Ari lives what he preaches. But I also want to dig a little bit because I'm mining for some ways that you take words that either came from other people or that you invented or you adapted from other players or just shapes that you make and workshop them in kind of a training scenario so that they're pounded deeper into your subconscious. Like, do you feel like you do a process like that when you shed? And if so, what sorts of things are going through your head when you're workshopping ideas?
Oh, wow. So you mean just things that I really want to remember while I'm playing that are important to me musically, that I need to kind of remind myself of?
Like say there's a motif, right? Like say you're working on some sort of pattern or motif you've invented, maybe just a run around the toms, like bidoo bop, right? Blues for Big Sid, something like that, but your own version. Like you're probably not just going to stop at practicing. Can I do right, left, right kick down the toms? Okay, got it. Now let's go to the gig. You're probably going to do something to create theme and variations and workshop that sort of idea so that other ideas flow from it, and so that you're kind of rehearsing flowing with that word. In other words, the analogy would be like you're learning a foreign language and you learn a new phrase and then you're using it in a sentence in a conversation or something like that. Do you feel like that's in your mind at all when you're approaching these types of things?
Yeah, I think it's definitely part of it. There's some things that need to be practiced more than others.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, some things, the concept is just tricky. Blues for Big Sid, is that the one that goes that like bibbida boom ba bibbida boom ba bibbida boom ba ba, right? Boom boom
Boom boom. Yeah.
Yeah, like so that's a good example, but because everybody knows it, but like I also did a little bit of a Patreon series on that specific lick and developing it, right? And so one of the things that I did, which was kind of the last part, I think it was 3 parts, was that I displaced it to the triplet, so that like it starts on one, right? But I started it on the end of, or the end of four, for example. So it sounded like one, two, two, one, two, three, ba-da-ba-da boom, ba-da-ba-da boom, ba-da-ba-da boom, ga, ba-da-ba-da boom, ga. I can do it slowly. One, two, three, ba-da-ba-doom, ga. Oh, fuck, I can't even do it anymore. Point is, it's a pretty advanced concept, right? And you can use it, but I didn't practice it enough that it entered my subconscious, as you can see, right? Because the rhythm is, it really completely changes the whole rhythm when you start, and you start displacing it to the, starting on the third triplet, starting on the second triplet, which is what I did, right? And I wrote it out, which helped, but I didn't really practice it enough. So as a result, it didn't really enter my playing. I never used it on a gig, actually.
Mhm.
As much as I've thought about it and I've actually practiced it, to some degree as well, but I haven't practiced it enough for it to enter my playing. Now, I always say, like, I probably have, like, 95% of the things that I've practiced, I've never used on a gig. And the why? Because I've never gotten them to the point that I could play them well enough. And that's why.
Mhm.
And so, what you're saying is right on. But at the same time, if I wouldn't have practiced those things, I wouldn't be as good as I am now. So it's like all those things that you practice make you better. Why do they make you better if you can't use them on a gig? Well, that's not really the goal. It's not really the focus, is to necessarily use everything that you play on a gig, because it's not about, for me, it's not about what I can play. It's much more about what I can hear and what I can
Mm.
understand. And that's what makes me a strong player, not about what I can play on the instrument. Um, everybody's heard the saying is, the most important thing about being a musician is listening. But I think a lot of people don't really understand the meaning behind it. But, like, actually, I mean, what it means to me is that, if I'm going to have a conversation with somebody on the bandstand, their ability to understand me and to listen to me is one of the most important things that I'm looking for. I'm not interested in having a conversation with somebody who doesn't speak the language, unless I'm trying to learn a different language. Uh, it's not very fun, right? Music is a conversation to me in its highest form. So I'm okay with, practicing things, and following through with creative ideas, and all these things, and never ever using them, playing wise, on the bandstand. That's okay, and that's just the reality of it. That it makes me understand music better. It makes me a faster learner, so that I can, like, for example, if I wanted to go back and remember that, I would be pretty fast with it. I'd need to take a few minutes and just kind of refresh it. But yeah, that's the end result is not for me playing what I practice. It just doesn't, it's okay. It's okay not to do that.
Yeah, it sounds to me like practice for you is to some degree its own reward. And you're also practicing visiting a creative state and playing with ideas, because that very meta skill, that ability to visit a creative place and play with ideas, is kind of the point, rather than necessarily any particular idea you might practice on any given day.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also something that I've enjoyed, in the past, to be able to explore. And it's something that, yeah, that I don't shy away from. But, not everybody also, if you have a student that's a beginning student, of course you want to gear what they're practicing towards music, especially if they like a certain kind of music and they understand it. You want to give them a few tools just to kind of get started. So of course it can vary, as far as me being a student and me being a teacher, I guess.
That's a good caveat as well, because you're probably at the level of experience where you can kind of just enjoy exploring ideas, and you've already kind of got your wheelhouse when you sit down and play, whereas somebody who's just beginning probably needs to get ideas into their lexicon pretty quickly, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's something really beautiful about practicing something that you don't know how you're going to use, because that's so often, for me, like I have a creative idea. That's cool. I want to explore this. Somebody asked me like, well, what are you doing? Like, how are you going to use this in music? I have no idea. Maybe I never will. But you know what? Maybe there's going to be a way that I can use this at some point. It's going to come back. And wouldn't that be cool?
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. I mean, I could talk to you for another 2 hours, but you've been very generous with your time. Where would you send people to check out what you've got going on these days?
I mean, obvious places like my website. I'm try to keep social media going, Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. But I would say my website is really the best place. Just sign my mailing list, email. I'll let you know. I do have Patreon, which I'm very active on, which I really recommend for people that are, interested in what I do. And, especially I would say, students that want to learn, how I'm thinking about music, or, there's so much content there, that again, it can get overwhelming, like what we were talking about before. But there's a really, really clear and good search function so that you can just search for really specifically what you want. And then also, I'm there to answer anybody's questions. So if you're looking for something, I'm more than happy to, be in contact with all the members and stuff to point them in the right direction, at least of where to go to watch what they want to watch. So awesome. I'd recommend Patreon for that. But I'm always interested to hear from people, and I have a YouTube channel too, but a lot of that is performances. So
I shall link it all in the description.
I appreciate that.
Anyway, this has been awesome. I'm glad we were finally able to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you so much, and great to talk to you too. And I'll be following what you're doing as well. Very, very interested in that too. And if you ever want to chat again, just hit me up.
Sounds great, sir. Well, have a great weekend, and I'll let you know when we're posting this. But thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Nate.